There's going to be a day where you'll start seeing your favorite hawker stalls close down. No more $3 meals, no more aunties calling you 帅哥. Slowly, they'll all just disappear. As absurd as this sounds, it may very well become the reality. Hawker culture in Singapore isn't just struggling, it's dying. A few months back, controversy was sparked over this Facebook post. A hawker complaining about a warning issued by the National Environment Agency, detailing that stall owners are required to be physically present at their stalls. His wife was 40 weeks pregnant at the time, and he felt the policy was unfair. This struck a nerve among Singaporeans. The debate exploded online, made headlines, and even reached the Singapore Parliament. Initially, it seemed like just another heated discussion over government policies and cost of living. But the more I dug into it, the more I realized the issues surrounding hawkers go way beyond this one Facebook post. From exorbitant rental fees to public pressure, hawker culture has been on a decline and it might be too late to save. To understand all of this, I'll break down the current state of hawker culture, how it came to be, and what the future might hold. Just to clarify, this video focuses strictly on hawker centers, not coffee shops or food courts. At its core, running a hawker stall is a business. And like any business, it boils down to how much money comes in and how much goes out. So let us look at the economics of running a hawker center by crafting a simple scenario. This is Ah Tiong. He runs a humble chicken rice stall along Smith Street. First off, rental. This is probably the most common complaint and what many consider the biggest burden. In the past, the government offered help through subsidies like the Government Hardship Scheme, but that has since been discontinued. Today, only about 40% of hawkers benefit from any form of rental subsidy. So for fairness, let's assume Ah Tiong pays a median rent of around $1,250 a month. Now, you might recall a moment back in 2018 when Senior Minister of State Amy Khor said in Parliament that
rentals do not directly affect food prices.
This statement received a ton of backlash. Many called the comment out of touch, even nonsensical. She drew this conclusion from a 2014 study, which showed that rental accounted for only 12% of a hawker's total costs. Therefore, what she said technically wasn't wrong. But does it mean rental isn't as big of an issue as people make it out to be? Well, not quite. Let's break down how NEA manages rent. Hawker stalls in Singapore are rented out through a tender system. There used to be something called a reserve rent, basically a minimum bid price, often set at around 85% of the assessed market rate, AMR. So if a stall's AMR was $1,000, the lowest starting bid would be $850. But in recent years, NEA scrapped the reserved rent concept.
Stalls will be subject to a revised tender scheme starting this month. This measure is to
now a bid can technically start at just $10. This sounds good on paper since it lowers the floors and gives aspiring hawkers a shot at lower rent. But bidding wars still happen, especially for popular locations with good footfall, which is why you might see some of the bids going into the upper range of thousands in the news. And who usually wins these spots? Not your average hawker, but established chains or people with deep pockets. The recent policy tweak is trying to deter this by extending the tenancy period to 6 years. But the initial high rent is still a massive barrier for newcomers. If Ah Tiong were just starting out, his hands would be tied, either having to take on drowning rental costs up front, or settle for a stall with barely any footfall. This ties back to that controversy mentioned in the start. Beyond the Facebook post, the owner runs a successful chain with 27 outlets, 2 in hawker centers and the rest in private spaces. NEA's concern here is clear. They want to prevent subletting and protect stalls from being snapped up by large operators. But the system isn't without flaws. Veteran hawker Niven Leong has criticized its effectiveness, pointing out that stall owners can skirt the rules by registering under someone else's name. In reality, many first-generation hawkers still sublet to young stallholders, who might otherwise be deterred by the high bidding prices. There have also been calls to abolish the bidding process entirely. and replace it with a balloting or selection-based system instead. But of course, that opens up a whole new can of worms. Who decides who's most deserving? Do we judge based on taste, background, business plan? So yes, rental may only be one part of the equation, but when you factor in location, competition, and revenue potential, it's a huge piece of the puzzle, and I think that's why rent is so heavily discussed. Moving on, other major costs include raw materials, labor, and licensing fees. Let's use Tiong again. He hires one assistant, paying them an average wage of $2,000. His operating costs, including cleaning, utilities, and licenses, come up to another $2,000. The largest overhead, though, is ingredients. This can vary a lot depending on the volume, but let's estimate $6,000 a month for a moderately busy chicken rice stall. Altogether, that's $11,250 a month in operating costs. If Tiong sells each plate for $3.50 and earns a generous 50% profit margin, he needs to sell roughly 6,430 plates a month. That's 214 plates a day, every day, just to break even. When factoring in inflation and the recent surge in food costs, hawkers are often forced to raise prices just to stay afloat. But consumers don't always respond well to that. Since the early 1900s, hawkers have held a special place in the hearts of Singaporeans. People associated them with peak affordability and convenience. They had their go-to stall, and hawkers probably knew patrons' orders by heart. Over time, food prices rose with inflation, but regulars remained fiercely loyal. They understood the struggles, and the food was well worth the extra dollar. But today, it seems that spark has just faded. In 2024, Singapore saw one of the sharpest spikes in food prices, driven by global supply chain disruptions. Hawkers had little choice but to respond. Some raised prices while others shrank portions. But because cheap food has been so deeply ingrained in the hawker image, many diners were outraged. Some took to social media to complain, others argued with stall owners directly. The relationship that once felt like a friendship now feels more like a transaction. Even Minister Grace Fu stepped in.
Think that, if you're prepared to pay $18, $20 for pasta, why are you not prepared to pay $5 for wonton mee?
Okay, I'm not sure if this comparison works, but the point was clear. The perception of cheap food in hawkers has taken its toll on the industry. One important aspect to consider is who hawker centers serve. Beyond just the working class, they are also a lifeline for many from lower income backgrounds or senior citizens. For these groups, even a small price increase can genuinely affect their daily expenses. To soften the blow, the government has rolled out CDC vouchers to alleviate rising costs. But this was a short-term fix. The disconnect between stall owners and diners, and the pressure to keep prices low, doesn't just affect today's hawkers. It also shapes how future generations see the trade. If veteran hawkers are already struggling, you can imagine how tough it must be for new hawkers. Unlike those with decades of loyal customers, newcomers start from zero, with no reputation and barely any room for error. Most diners stick to familiar stalls, so when someone tries a bold new recipe, it often goes ignored.
Probably when they see young people cooking, they are quite fearful to try.
Worse still, many traditional dishes aren't written down. They are passed on by few, making them especially difficult to learn without a mentor. You occasionally see fresh faces, like Fei Sai. For her, taking over her family's coffee stall wasn't settling down. It was purposeful. She's found meaning in preserving tradition while bringing new skills to the table. But hawkers like Fei are rare exceptions. The daily reality is brutal. A typical hawker's day starts at 4 AM at the wet market, followed by hours of preparation, standing over hot stoves in sweltering conditions, and closing well after dinner service. It's physically draining. Many veteran hawkers develop chronic back pain and heat-related health issues. And it's financially uncertain. A rainy week or temporary closure can wipe out a whole month's profits. For older generations, hawking was a necessity, a way to survive without formal education or job prospects. With the median hawker age nearing 60 and most of their children pursuing university degrees, it's clear that few are willing to take on the same burdens. And honestly, who can blame them? In 2020, Singapore's hawker culture was officially added to the UNESCO representative list. It was a proud moment, but the fact of the matter is that it's more symbolic than practical. It spreads awareness, but it doesn't solve the underlying issues. The government has tried to help by opening new hawker centres, introducing incubation stalls, and allowing social enterprises to support the scene. But as Associate Professor Yeo Kang Shua has said,
I think it's easy to preserve the shell, but we need to preserve the software or the soul.
So what does the future look like? Well, I think here are some of the possible paths. In the ideal scenario, food prices stabilize and hawkers manage to maintain affordability. More youth, inspired by education, campaigns, or passion, take pride in continuing the trade. Consumers gain purchasing power and are more willing to support hawker food. Lastly, the government steps in with consistent subsidies, infrastructure improvements, and training. But let's be real, this is a long shot. In another case, the government might resort to opening up hawker stalls to migrant workers or foreign chefs. Like many other sectors in Singapore, we may outsource the trade. This could keep the stalls running, possibly even introducing new flavours and culinary diversity. But it essentially ruins the Singaporean identity of hawker culture. In the worst case scenario, the older generation will retire and no one will take their place. Stalls remain vacant and eventually, big chains and generic food courts take over. And just like that, hawker culture slowly fades into the past. Ultimately, this comes down to one question. How much does this culture mean to us? Hawker centres aren't just about cheap meals. They're a part of our heritage and our national identity. But like all traditions, they need people to believe in them to survive. And that responsibility doesn't just fall on the government or stall owners. It rests with all of us.